Chip Tam and football. That's what Pittsburgh does. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Brian Batko with you here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, one of our Steelers beat writers, always bringing on different guests from all walks of life, national coverage, former players, other people in the local media. Today, going to be joined by Arif Hasan. He's written for The Athletic, for Pro Football Network. Now he's doing his own thing. This wide left newsletter at Substack, and he's kind of an underground king of NFL draft coverage. I'm excited to get into the weeds a little bit with him about his takeaways from the combine last week in Indy. Some big picture stuff too on what doesn't matter coming out of the combine 40 times and some of the metrics and analytics about it. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation to kind of keep in mind and frame the rest of this pre-draft process. And as always, we are brought to you by Pella. No better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than from Pella. They can help you save on your energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started on your new windows and doors installation planning with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. All right, there he is. Arif Hasan covers the NFL. You can find his work at wideleft.football, right? Is where
Mhm.
most of your writings are going now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm always intrigued when your headlines pop up, and I'm like, that's something I hadn't really considered or thought about. There's a lot of places you can get the latest winners and losers from the combine or mock draft 12.0. But, when I see you writing about, is the combine dying and things of that nature, I get intrigued. So I know you were in Indy last week. What's kind of your, I guess, latest sense or latest feelings of maybe things that the average fan is paying too much attention to during these combine weeks, or stuff that's maybe on the cutting edge that people aren't paying enough attention to that might reshape the way we talk and think about the combine 3, 4, 5 years from now? Because for the next 2 months, fans and junkies are going to be sifting through the data and arguing in comment sections or even in real life about, whoa, you want the Steelers to take that guy? He ran a 4.8 40. What can you do to kind of tell us what's getting short shrift and what's some stuff that maybe has overstayed its welcome a little bit in terms of the draft conversation?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The 40-yard dash, gets all the headlines. And, for some positions, it definitely matters. For cornerback, it's actually really difficult to find good cornerbacks that ran slowly. Richard Sherman is notable because he's an exception more than anything else. And, even his profile from a complete athletic perspective actually showed a lot more promise than I think people would imagine. But as you could guess, all of the positions have different workouts that kind of correlate to their success. And so I think at wide receiver, where we pay a lot of attention to the 40-yard dash, yeah, that matters a lot if you're a smaller wide receiver. So, for example, Tez Johnson didn't run as quick a 40 as one would hope at 154 pounds. That's a legitimate concern, right? But on the other hand, somebody like a Trey Harris who's over 6'2", these taller receivers, they don't really, the 40 doesn't really mean as much for them. It can have like a small impact on the way their analytical profile will turn out. But he ended up having like a well above average combine for the positions that for the workouts that matter for his position, specifically the vertical leap, 38.5-inch vertical leap, which is going to matter a lot more for the way that players of his size and his position tend to play than the 40-yard dash does. He ran like a 4.54 or something along those lines. But at every position it matters a little bit more. So if you take a look at all of the ways that, they work these players out, probably the three cone is actually the most applicable drill across all positions. It impacts the greatest number of positions. So, I found that the three cone has like meaningful predictive outcomes for safety, edge rusher, linebacker, offensive tackle. And then you can parse out some of the roles by, smaller or bigger. So smaller running backs, smaller defensive tackles, and smaller receivers like, Tez Johnson, will want to do really well in the three cone because that tells us more about the type of movements that we'll see at their position. And I talked about offensive tackles, interior offensive linemen, so guards and centers. You want them to do really well at the short shuttle. There's actually a lot of really, really good data that the short shuttle is, maybe a dispositively important drill at that position. It's also good for safety and cornerback. The broad jump tests explosiveness. We actually see some on-field results for those bigger defensive tackles and bigger running backs as well as linebacker. And you can kind of play around with the data a little bit. You can say, hey, he didn't register a broad jump. He registered a 10 split and a vertical. So we can probably make a good guess as to what his broad jump, would be. And so you can start, estimating other explosive drills or other agility drills based off of that. But, I think a lot of people don't pay attention to the fact that, some of these other positions, a lot of these other drills matter more. And then you have to adjust for size. So 321-pound guard Tyler Cooper from Alabama, a lot of people think he had an awful combine. He ran a
Booker,
really
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He ran like a 5.38 or something along those lines. And I know his short shuttle was something like a 4.86. But when you adjust his workouts for his size, he actually had very slightly above average athletic profile. So if this was a guy you were hoping would pull in, because he, from my understanding, talking to people, it wasn't that people expected him to light up the combine. They just kind of hoped that he would, do as well as like a starting offensive guard would. Well, he did. You just have to adjust for the fact that these 321 pounds, unlike some of the guards that ran that were like 300 pounds. Their workouts are going to look different. The amount of force that they can bring to bear based off of their movement capability, those are going to be different. Some workouts, your size is not going to be as important for evaluating that workout. It could be important in an NFL context in other ways, but at places like guard and defensive tackle, it matters a lot when you adjust these workouts for size. So, you can get deep into the weeds and stuff like that, but I would hesitate using just one workout to write off a player. Maybe at cornerback, if they run a slow 40, I'd be really skeptical, but there are ways to get around it. Sherman was explosive. Everyone knows he had really long arms. And he's a very tall corner. That's one way to actually make up for it. And sometimes it has to be scheme specific, right? So, Sherman is in a cover 3. They're not asking him to, dig in and cover a bunch of guys running in routes or dig routes or anything like that.
Right.
He's basically covering deep. And so that length is going to matter a lot because it's just him and the sideline. So sometimes how a player is used is going to also matter as well. So that was a lot at once. I hope that kind of helped a little bit, but that's how I view a lot of these workouts.
Do you think we should be paying more attention to? It seems like now the next gen stats folks are doing more with kind of tracking the speed when players are going through these individual workouts, like the receivers, the tight ends, the DBs, going through that gauntlet drill where they're catching passes from each side and they're clocking their miles per hour. Like, I'm just so curious, like, kind of what NFL teams are looking at in these ways. And, you mentioned like the 3-cone or the short shuttle, and it seems like fewer and fewer guys are even opting to do those agility drills at the combine now. And it's a lot of this year more than ever. I feel like I just heard players, well, come see me at my pro day. And it's like, I've been to pro days. They're very comprehensive and thorough with all the drills and testing that's done, but it's also controlled environment. You can hear a pin drop in there, and they're in their same facility. They're not being stacked up against other prospects there at their position, other than maybe a couple teammates. So it seems like the combine, I still enjoy it. I still kind of nerd out over it to an extent because of where it is on the NFL calendar. But it just seemed like I learned less this year, maybe than in years past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, it's been a trend to see players do fewer agility drills. And this trend doesn't hold up at the 40 or at the explosion drills. It holds up a little bit at the bench, but I don't mind that. The bench is not that
Yeah.
important.
It was also funny to
um,
see some 340-pound offensive lineman from Utah put up 44 reps on the bench or
oh, it's
whatever. But
wonderful. Yeah.
rarely did those guys end up being someone you were ever heard from again. And yeah, I guess the 40 still gets a lot of guys doing it, except for at the QB position. There were 3 of them, I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
this year. So that's kind of fascinating to me as well.
Yeah, I think for quarterbacks, like they used to have quarterbacks run the full gamut, but even like 10 years ago, quarterbacks were just declining to do, various workouts. A lot of people are like, well, that kind of doesn't matter the position. And kind of doesn't. When I like at first I was even reluctant to test, all of these athletic drills for quarterbacks just because I was like, no way. I
Yeah.
did eventually, and there is some signal and some like the broad jump and the short shuttle. There's a small amount of signal there. You want to be better at those two, but it really doesn't matter a huge amount. But yeah, the agility drills, that's part of the piece I was writing on why the combine was dying. The agility drills are just not happening. And the reason for that is they occur last. And because the NFL has moved the workouts from midday to the evening so that you can get the 40-yard dash on primetime television. The agility drills occur at 7, 8, sometimes even 9 p.m. These prospects have been through the ringer all day. So they've been going through sometimes on the same day it's medicals, usually not, but they've been going through, these podium or media sessions. They've been going through
Oh, those
team
are
interviews.
hilarious too. I mean, I know
Oh,
you've
yeah.
been there for those, and it's like, well, they're up there. It's one of the weirdest media dynamics for sure. I mean, a guy getting questions from first it's someone who covered him in college who's like asking about next year's right guard and how he's going to
Yeah.
do, and then there's somebody from the Cowboys asking if he's met with them, and then there's someone from wherever who's like, if you were a piece of cheese, what would you be? And it's like,
Yeah, exactly.
those guys'
Yeah.
heads must be spinning when they get through
Yeah,
those.
it's got to be wild because like you go through media training at these bigger schools like Texas, Alabama, and so on, and they teach you how to answer a lot of questions, but they don't teach you how to answer like if you were a piece of cheese, what kind of cheese you would be, right?
Well,
Like,
that's another like I guess I digress here, but do
sure.
you put much stock into the whole formal meeting with Team X,
Mm-mm.
informal meeting with Team Y?
No.
Or are we all just wasting our time when those questions get asked? And some of the players now, it seems like they're either getting coached to or they've just made the personal decision that they don't even want to answer those questions. And yet it still gets written and talked about and analyzed to death a lot this time of year.
Yeah, it does. And players will talk about the teams that they had already scheduled meetings with, but not teams that they have scheduled meetings for. Sometimes they don't know, and so we're always getting incomplete information there. But teams will have contact with all of these players at some point during the
Right.
process. That's one reason why they value the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl so much, is because they'll have a lot of those meetings with those players then, and then they won't meet with them at the combine. And a lot of people understand, right, that oh, they didn't meet with them at the combine. They're not that interested. And it's like, well, they met
Yeah.
literally every player at the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl. So check that out first. But also, they may not have met them yet. I remember for a while, the Patriots would tell players, like, you can't tell people that you've met with
Yeah.
us.
I remember
And
that
so,
too.
yeah. And so, they like, hey, which teams did you meet with? Oh, I met with the Steelers, the Seahawks, the Vikings, and another team I can't name. It's like, the Patriots got it. Like it was incredible. And sometimes they'll just say, I'm not going to say any of the teams, in which case, like, well, at least one of them was the Patriots. It was like, not helpful to the Patriots cause.
Yeah.
But yeah, they meet with almost all of these players. There are a couple of teams where I've noticed there's even like a negative correlation or a negative relationship between how often they meet with a player and their likelihood of drafting them. I think the Ravens and then the Chargers, because the Chargers just got Joe Ortiz. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was kind of like a carryover. That matters. And I know that, some of the Vikings' biggest prospects that they've ever drafted under the Spielman era, they never talked to once. Like, so Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks, they never talked to those guys in the pre-draft
So they try to
process.
play cat and mouse of like we don't want any teams to know we're on their scent so that they don't leapfrog us in the
Yeah,
draft and take this guy. I mean that's another reason why I think it's kind of a moot point because you never even know the motivation behind some of these meetings
exactly.
or non-meetings for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's a player with a bunch of red flags and teams are meeting with them, sometimes they're asking him about those red flags. Like, hey, you
Yeah.
got arrested. Can you explain this? Sometimes they're asking about teammates, right?
Yeah.
Like the Vikings met with Cam Ward, for example, and I doubt the Vikings are ever going to be in a position to draft him or would draft him, given that they've got,
Yeah.
their own quarterback. But it wouldn't shock me if they were asking him about Damian Martinez, right? So you don't even know like what they're working with in there. Sometimes teams are meeting with players just to get their Rolodex updated, just to make
Sure.
sure that they've got all their notes ready for pro scouting 4 years from now when a player hits free agency, because that's the only contact that they've had with that guy. And people change a lot in 4 years, but it's more information that you had than
Yeah.
before. So I don't put any stock in the meetings. I stopped asking ages ago. And it gets in the way of like actually interesting questions for a lot of these players too,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
kind of frustrating.
Yeah, sometimes I don't mind the questions that are like, "What's your favorite band?" or something, because I'm at least like mildly intrigued by what a player is
Yeah.
going to say. Versus when you're like, "What's the biggest thing you've been trying to improve?" and they're going to give you some stock answer that their
Right.
trainer
Yeah.
or whatever told them to say.
Yeah, I like I don't do as many player interviews at the combine as I used to, but like sometimes even the most kind of benign questions, so long as you're somewhat familiar with the player's background, will give you a lot more information than you expected. Like I remember asking, gosh, it was a Minnesota guy, so I felt like I had to go out and talk
Okay,
to
yeah.
him. He's an
Gophers.
offensive lineman from a small school, Ben Bart, that was it.
Yeah.
And he, I remember like reading a story, heading up to the podium. I'm like going through my phone trying to figure out who this guy is. Reading a story that he had showed up to campus at like 210 pounds. Here he is at the combine, 320 pounds, and I'm like, that's crazy. Like, I know a lot of players gain a lot of weight over college, but that's crazy. So I wanted to ask him about it. And he was talking about, the lack of facilities that you get in Division III college, the fact that you've got a really great nutritionist, but not everyone has access to them because it's only one person managing a team of 90, and how he had to kind of come up with his own weight gain regimen himself. And he shared the most disgusting sounding shake I've ever heard of in my life. It was nice for me because it went a little viral, but also like I asked around, I was like, hey, what would you recommend for this guy? And like, there's another offensive lineman who's like, you don't have to do all of, what is he doing? You don't have to do all that.
Yeah.
It's just like stuff like that, where it's like, he felt like he had to, go it on, go it alone for kind of this position he found out he was going to play once he arrived on campus. It's like this whole thing. And I think those are interesting stories. They reveal a lot about the player more than did you meet with team X or Y. And I didn't expect to get like a huge answer. I thought, oh, I worked with like, the coaches and we developed a nutrition plan. So I ate 3,000, calories for breakfast and 10,000 calories a day. And, something I could never do. Right.
Sure.
And I was going to like write that in. It's going to be a normal profile. But he like went into like, the reason I chose bananas and peanut butter for the milkshake, which does sound good, was this. And the reason I chose like this for the milkshake is like, oh, okay, so you did your own research, but also like probably you didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of fun, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to what we were about to say, yes, this new kind of way to gauge, player athleticism or
Right.
how things are going to translate. And I like everything you kind of talked about at the top. It's always, or most of the time, I guess, kind of reinforcing what these scouts have already seen in game action and what they've studied all season long in the numbers and backing all that up. So can some of, the times in these, on-field workout and positional drills be a little bit more instructive? I mean, I guess it's still guys running around in underwear as opposed to wearing full pads and
Mhm.
jerseys and everything. But I feel like there needs to be some sort of needle to thread there of like, okay, this is more football than football like training.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's a couple of things I want to touch on with this one. Was first, like you mentioned, that we've got these GPS trackers in the players, the pads and the shirts before, and how that might apply to some of these drills, but also just like watching some of these positional drills. That does tell us a decent amount of information. And when you talk to team scouts, they say that, they're at some of these drills, they're like eagle-eyed, right? They're looking directly at these drills in a way they were not remotely interested in like during the 40, right?
Yeah.
And so for offensive linemen, they have something called the wave drill. You have to move back and forth and then back. For defensive backs, you've got what's called a line drill where you backpedal, shift your knees one way, shift your knees the other way. So basically, opening the gate is what they usually call it for cornerbacks. But like opening your hips to one sideline, then the other sideline, then turning around, catching the ball, and running through it.
And then the Tim Austin drill for the current Steelers defensive
Right.
coordinator, which
Yeah.
I feel like that gains a little bit more steam and notoriety every year.
Yeah, of course. I love that they've, like, named some of these drills, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like, those kinds of drills that, like, "Hey, we're not necessarily looking for you to catch the ball, that'd be nice, but we're looking for how stable your foundation is." Like, if your head is kind of just, like, pointed directly at the coach the whole time, you don't have to move your eyes at all. We're looking to see if, on the line drill, for example, you stay on the hash mark the whole time or if you drift off a little bit. Darian Porter, for example, looked completely on track, like he was on a railroad or something like that. That looked really great. How fluid your hips are when you move. Those kinds of things, and they seem to matter a lot more for a lot of these scouts. But the GPS data that we have might suggest we've got another, like maybe a little bit more of an objective measurement to take a look at it. So right now, if you go to the Combine IQ dashboard, I wrote a little bit about how it came together and what we might learn from it. You'll see, like, at the very bottom, you have to scroll down. At the very bottom, you'll see all of these like top mile per hour in particular drills, and they've got like 40 position drills, set up so you can take a look at what the max miles per hour during the hoop drill was, or the Terrell Austin drill, or the wide receiver gauntlet. And they found, we're so new into this data that we don't know what is meaningful, what isn't yet. There seems to be some signal, and you mentioned early the wide receiver gauntlet drill. the fastest players through those drills over the past couple of years were Puka Nacua and Keon Coleman, who ran very slow 40s,
Yeah.
right? And they've
Bigger
turned
bodied
into
physical guys. Yeah.
exactly, bigger body physical guys that have turned into very early in their careers impact players for their teams. And it might just be either like if you run a slow 40, you better be good at the gauntlet drill, or
Yeah.
the gauntlet drill is just no matter what, a good thing, for a receiver to be able to accomplish. I don't know. We don't know how important it could just be random, right? But we're getting a lot of this data right now that we'll be able to build off a foundation of down the line that might allow us to do stuff like project performance in a three cone if you didn't run it, or just project performance overall, just in the NFL. Once we have enough data on these players to kind of get a better athletic profile, what they do in drills that, NFL scouts and NFL coaches have determined is really important for the position that they play, replicates the movement patterns that we'll see in the NFL. And the proliferation of kind of this GPS data and stuff like that, one, reinforces the importance of the combine and decreases the importance of the combine, right? We don't get the GPS data at these pro days. And on top of that, the pro days create different surfaces, right? Not everybody's playing on the same,
Right.
turf. And so that's going to change speeds and
USC had that
performances.
famous, or was it UCLA, or both had that famous pro day a year or two ago where it was like pouring down rain.
Pouring rain,
And
yeah.
everybody's like, "Oh, these wide receivers are trying
These
to,"
poor guys, yeah.
yeah,
I actually talked to someone about that. I was like, "Hey, like, what in the world?" And they were like, "Oh, yeah, we have multipliers and factors for all of this. So,
yeah,
we know that the Ohio State track is a little fast compared to the NFL track, so we'll adjust it. We adjusted it for, I think it was USC's pro day that was in the rain. We adjusted for that, and we adjust for, if you're running in longer grass versus shorter grass, right? We adjust for, and I asked, like, hey, there's a new surface. There's a new surface for Lucas Oil Field
in
this
Indy,
year.
yeah,
Yeah, versus the past, 3 years where it was like a black hard rubber infill. This year it's like a coconut husk and cork infill. It is meant to be more environmentally friendly. That's not why the Colts chose it. It increases stability on game day. It does decrease speed a little bit, but it's meant to kind of protect your ankles a little bit more and replicate, outside environment type stuff. And so that surface is going to make you run a little bit slower. And I asked, a couple of analytics people, like, hey, are you adjusting for this fact? Because, like, at the time we were getting kind of slow 40s for the positions. It was just day one, I think. So,
yeah.
we had the edge rushers, the defensive tackles, and stuff like that. Are you adjusting for it? And later we would end up having like a very fast running back class, and so it was
And
like, oh,
receivers, right? Yeah.
yeah, and the receivers were running, despite the expectation that people be breaking a record.
Yeah, nobody
That
went
didn't,
Xavier worthy, but there
yeah,
were no like real low outliers from what I saw.
yeah, exactly. And we had more people run below 4.4 than I think we've had in a long time.
Isn't
Not
that
below
probably too a
4.3,
factor
but
of so many guys now are literally like every year there's an evolution of how
yes.
well people train for this from December to late February. And like you said, someone like Puka Nakua or Keon Coleman not running a super fast 40, but hauling through that gauntlet drill. Like I've heard anecdotes of the rare player being like, I didn't really train for the 40 because yes, I know it can help my draft stock, but it also just doesn't really help me improve as a player. But I think that's the minority, and a lot of guys are spending their time in Florida
Yeah.
or Arizona or California or whatever, trying to get that 40 as low as they possibly can.
Yeah, yeah. So there are like people have brought in track coaches. So depending on the agency that you sign with, and this will motivate a
Sure.
lot of players to sign with particular agencies, they have deals with, pre-combine, workout facilities. And so, like, a lot of agents will direct their clients to, for example, Exos or
Yeah.
IMG or wherever, right? And a lot of these places have like Olympic track coaches, coaching the players on how to run a 40, because you can be fast on the field. That's not necessarily going to translate to a quick 40, which is very funny because now does that translate the other way? But there's a lot of technical coaching that goes into, for example, the start, getting out of that start, how wide or how long that first stride is going to be impacts a lot of your 40. How long you're in what's called the drive phase as you transition into being an upright runner is going to impact your 40. At the Olympic level, they count your steps. Like they're like, oh, you've got 19 steps in this 100-meter dash, so we want to make sure each one, and we'll coach each one of the steps. They're not doing it at that level, but there's a lot of technical coaching that goes into the 40-yard dash for a lot of these players. And I actually think it's kind of interesting because this is like body and technique coaching. And so in some sense to me, it does kind of matter because it is a small indication of how well you respond to coaching that changes the way your body moves, right? In a high stress environment. And so how well you respond to that might mean something. And so I've always maintained that, like, yeah, I know it's weird that the 20-yard split seems to matter for offensive linemen, which by the way, it seems to matter. But I think a lot of that is because it requires a lot of awareness of your body and a lot of control over, your ability to move your body in really quick timelines. That seems to, that's really important for an offensive lineman in general, but that seems to be kind of one of the signals the 40 is sending us. And so I think the increase, in very player specific 40 specific training, even the sprint coaches have to learn because they don't get blocks, right? So the sprint coaches also have to learn how to coach the 40. But there's a change in technology. The shoes are getting better. You've got stiffer running surfaces depending on the shoes that you're wearing or the cleats that you're digging into using whatever turf you're using. So there's that kind of technology. And then there's all kinds of technology on what can improve your speed outside of literally running. And so we found, for example, that training for the vertical improves your speed. And so a lot more players are now, developing lower body explosion in order to get better at not to get better at football, to get better at the 40. Turns out it also will help you get better at football, but that's ancillary at that point. So yeah, all kinds of technology has come in. The focus on the drill itself has changed things. The technical expertise has come in. And so that's increased, 40 times. If you take a look at track times over like just high school track times, from like 2015 to 2019, there's a very small, increase in high school athlete speed. Then from 2019 to like this year, there's been a massive move forward. And some of that is the increase in investment that high school track is receiving. So you get a bunch of college coaches now coaching high school. The technology in the shoes is a huge part of it, and the amount of time that people devote. And so,
Yeah.
these are trends that, like, if you're kind of interested in athletic performance, are worth paying attention to.
So I guess to tie a bow on it, 5 years from now, are people going to be saying not so much, oh, Matthew Golden 4.2940 versus Luther Burton's 21 mile per hour through the gauntlet drill is what we're looking at now.
People love running and people
Yeah.
intuitively understand running. And so the 40 is, we know what the 40 is. You don't have to, people have been running since birth. You don't have to explain the 40 to anyone. So it's always going to be exciting. But I think hopefully in the future, we start having a lot more nuanced conversations about a bunch of these different, metrics that have come out, ways to evaluate players, and, what workout data can really tell us and how important it is. Because I'll be honest, I love the 40-yard dash. I found it to be less and less important as I'm going through the data as the years go on, but I love watching it. I love
There's still
people
something
running
soothing
fast.
about sitting
Yeah.
there and just watching guy after guy run, and then
Yeah. So
the natural instinct, and you're just like, oh my gosh, that's a humongous human being, and it's like a
yeah.
refrigerator moving at 4.7
Yeah,
speed.
but I know we're closing up, but I just, as an aside, I want people who think that these guys are running slow to run their own 40-yard dash and see if they can break 6 seconds. It took Rich Eisen a lot of time to break 6 seconds, and power to him for doing it. But you see a 320-pound athlete clocking a 5.03 40-yard dash. That's one of the fastest movers you will ever see in your life, and I want people to appreciate that.
Yeah, it's like a grizzly bear coming at you or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But well, hey, Arif, thanks so much, man. You want to tell people, where they can find more? I'm looking forward to your consensus big board that you do every year around draft time, because it really does pull from all your, everybody's got like their favorite draft guru or analyst out there, and you kind of pull them all together and get them in one place to maybe represent a more, diverse array of opinions out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find all of that over at wideleft.football. I've got 2 pieces on the NFL Combine, one on the NFL Combine IQ dashboard, how that came together. I talked to the NFL Next Gen Stats team, another on whether or not the NFL Combine is dying. I wrote that last year, pinned it this year to the top of the Substack. And like you said, I've got the consensus board coming where I get data from over 100 NFL draft gurus to produce kind of a consensus opinion on all these players and find maybe some takeaways from that data, like who the most polarizing players in the draft are. So you can check all of that out over at my newsletter, wideleft.football.
Yeah, those are always fun to read. So thanks so much to Arif, Hasan, for joining us here. Appreciate your time, and hope everybody enjoyed a little bit of getting into the weeds on NFL draft and combine stuff to prep us for the next couple months here.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks everybody for checking out that discussion, and hopefully it was informative on kind of what you can read into a lot and what maybe doesn't matter quite as much as you're forming and shaping your own Steelers draft opinions through the rest of this pre-draft process, taking you all the way up to the end of April in Green Bay. We're gonna have plenty more coverage on the channel the rest of this week, really leading into free agency on Monday. And this was Chip Tam and football. Special thanks also to Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For more than 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo most likely will be back with Wednesday's North Shore Drive podcast. I'll be on with Chris for the Friday episode of the show. I'll talk to you all then.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.